Hi, welcome to the latest episode of Thoughts in the Greenhouse. I'm Renée Wills, co-founder and client lead, and I'm joined today by two folks in the healthcare marketing space, Cassidy Crook, who is head of US HCP Marketing at Calliditas Therapeutics. Hey, Cassidy. As well as Patrick Aldworth, who is the head of marketing strategy at Motivv Health. And so we brought the three of us together today because we wanted to focus on an area that we're pretty sure everybody is here is interested in, is the area of our own career growth. And what is the next career move? And in particular, why the three of us would be a good mix is because all three of us have worn different hats. We've all been on the marketing side as a director of marketing, but we've all worn different hats as well. And we thought it would be interesting just to have a chat about our own learnings along the way and some of the things that we picked up, because maybe it'll provide a little insight as you figure out what your path is. So my background is I started out as a pharmaceutical rep. I went into hospital sales. I then went into marketing, all within one organization, literally. And then an advertising agency came along and lured me to the sexy advertising world. And I thought that was really great. But then I realized, wait a minute, I still want to be a director of marketing. And one of my clients provided an opportunity. So I jumped back into marketing and I became a director. I was the one launching on the stage. I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. But through that experience and gaining more perspective, I realized that the advertising world was really where my heart is at. So I moved back to advertising. I work for some pretty big name advertising agencies, which were super exciting. And then finally, I started my own advertising agency. So those are the hats I've worn. Cassidy, why don't you share your background?
Yeah, absolutely, Renee. So I actually started my career in lab sciences, biochemistry, biophysics, and love science, love following the data, kind of like uncovering hidden truths and telling a story, but limited kind of human interaction in that setting. And so the other thing I think that really stood out to me is that you couldn't necessarily see the end result or the impact of the work that you were doing day to day. And so I knew that I was looking for something different, something where I could be more collaborative. And I actually ended up finding myself similarly in an advertising agency in the pharmaceutical space, much more creative, really that kind of environment that allowed me to interact with others in the way that I was looking for. More out of the box thinking, but ultimately ended up in pharmaceutical marketing. I've been at large organizations, highly matrixed organizations, and much smaller organizations. And that allowed me to kind of get back to the science one step closer. Really, kind of nurtured my passion for drug discovery, and allowed me to work with, cross-functionally with very different roles in the organization and kind of have that big picture vision. So that's where I am today.
Cool. Well, Patrick, I know you had some different hats as well.
Yeah, I have. I've taken an interesting path through healthcare. Similar to you, Renee, I started as a pharmaceutical sales rep. I started a long time ago, and things were different in pharmaceutical sales. But very quickly, I got an opportunity to move into the marketing department, which was really kind of where my underlying interest lied. I like setting strategy and things like that. So marketing seemed like a good fit. And then learning more about, a highly matrixed cooperative organization, there are a lot of different departments that feed into that. So from marketing, I had the opportunity to move on to sales training and leadership development, which was an interesting experience. And it did open my eyes to the fact that I really do love marketing. So spending a few years in training and development led me back to marketing, with the real reason behind my personal choice is I really like to set the strategy. I like to interpret the data and to make those really fun investigatory processes work out to an opportunity to see where maybe a opportunity that wasn't clear earlier exists. And for me, marketing was the way to do that. And following my marketing career, I went to a startup where now I have that opportunity on a day-to-day basis to really focus on strategy.
Cool. Well, thus the title, Head of Strategy. So let's talk a little bit, because I think we've all worked in a number of organizations. And let's just start with, if you're considering a move, what should you be considering about moving from one company to another company? Like, the first thing that comes to my mind is that there's totally different cultures. And like, I know I worked at 3 different pharmaceutical companies in marketing, and they had very different cultures. One was French, one was very US based. I guess 2 were US based, but the cultures were different. And I think that is really important. Like, culture and who you work with and how you work. It's not just what we do, it's like how we do it and the people that we do it with. And so that's like an interesting sort of jumping point. I don't know. Patrick, do you want to talk about what your observations are as far as different companies?
Yeah, for sure. And well, there are great people at every type of organization, and culturally, I think that the important thing from my perspective when deciding, is this a company that I could see myself working with or for or not, is really their focus on whether it's a sales-led organization or a marketing-led organization, where the choice for me came down to, do I want to execute against a plan every day, or do I want to help set up that plan? And in certain organizations, there's that whole thought process of, we're going to do it this way because that's the way it's always been done. And for me, that was one of the things that set my alarm bells off and made me recognize very quickly that new ideas and a different way to approach things may not be as welcome in an organization that is regimented and structured, and not to say a little more risk averse, but in organizations where the opportunity to run pilots and take chances within reason. Those are the types of organizations from a cultural perspective that I tended to gravitate towards. So that's my first thought when looking at an organization is there the opportunity to think outside the box, and is that encouraged, or is the encouragement to keep the status quo and keep marching forward?
That's great. So a lot of great points there, and I think the people and the culture are so critically important to consider. For me, I really like to diversify my experience and try as many things as possible, and so I'm always looking at what is the company, what is the product that I'm going to be working on, and really taking the time to understand that product, to understand the market and the value that it's bringing. You want to make sure that you're working on good products, and then you want to make sure that you're working at companies that are also similarly well positioned. So I think really doing your homework there, knowing what the company's goals are for the short term as well as the long term, I think that's so important. And then you don't want to be doing things that you've been doing before, right? So really advocate for trying new things, ensuring that you're telling that story with your career, that what you've been doing in the past and what you plan to do next, that is all kind of well connected with a thread of steel. So that would be my advice. I
love that. Another thing that comes to my mind is small versus large, and how you like to work. Like, we all need to think about like what kind of motivates us. Some of us like to have I know exactly what my job is and I have a job description, and don't ask me to do anything out of my job description, where others of us thrive in environments where I'm not sure what's going to happen today, right? And so there's a culture, because some companies tend to be one or the other, but there's also the size of the team. And if you're working on a large team, you're going to tend to have more sort of niche and clear responsibilities and like sort of an area that is your area of responsibility. Whereas the smaller the team, the more hats you need to wear. The hats are sort of a theme today. But the more things that you need to do, which I love, because that exposed me to a lot of different things in my career. So working for a smaller organization or even a smaller team, so you could be working for a smaller team within a larger organization, but that smaller team will give you access to like a lot of different experiences and kind of push you a little bit into maybe areas you aren't as comfortable and encourage you to grow. So I think that's a huge opportunity. So with that said, what if we want to move outside of traditional like pharma marketing, right? What if we're considering another move? Because all three of us have done that, right? And so think about a role that you've had outside of traditional marketing and maybe contrast that. Like think about what is it like working in the marketing area and what was it like working in the other role? So Cassidy, why don't you start? Because you've worked on the agency side and the marketing side.
Yeah, definitely. So certainly kind of thinking about agency versus marketing. As I said before, I think agency really allows you to foster innovation and out of the box thinking. For me, I was on the copy side when I was at agency. And so I spent a lot of time thinking through like audience and message and how do you deliver the right message to the right audience at the right time. I know it's a very kind of overused phrase, but I think it's so critically important in marketing. And honestly, agency is a lot of fun. Like you're having a great time with the colleagues that you're, there in the trenches with. Marketing, certainly, as Patrick said, you really get to set the strategy, kind of be in the driver's seat in that sense. You're certainly still taking direction from above. And so maybe that's a little bit of a misconception. I think we'll get into those things. But you do really see the bigger picture. You're thinking about not only kind of the quarter, the year, but the 3-year horizon, the 10-year horizon. And that's something that I really love is not only kind of like analyzing the markets today, but predicting what it's going to look like tomorrow to set the company up for success.
Cool. Patrick.
Yeah, I agree with everything Cassidy said. And I also think one of the major things that is different for me now. I spent the majority of my career in traditional pharmaceutical marketing, and now being on essentially the vendor side as a service provider for pharmaceuticals, I spend most of my time talking to people who were in roles that I had been in previously. And I think, the biggest, most glaring difference for me is how many things pharmaceutical marketers have, how many plates they have to keep spinning on a day-to-day basis. And that big picture, as Cassidy mentioned, is so important to keep in mind. And what I found as I moved into other roles, especially outside of pharma, is that my focus was able to narrow so much more extremely focused than I was as a pharmaceutical marketer, where you have the ability to really zero in on one aspect or one problem and dive deep in it, where in previous roles it was a lot of times it felt like having to keep a 30,000 foot view on everything rather than dive down into some very specific areas.
That drinking from the fire hose thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And having been a marketer and on the agency side, I can say what you guys just said. I totally agree with both of you. And what's interesting to me was, and maybe I'll transition into misperceptions because I think that's kind of a fun space, is I thought when I moved from advertising into marketing, one thing that I thought was I would have more control. I thought that marketers, as an advertising person, you give recommendations, right? And then it's up to the marketer to decide what to do with them. And sometimes junior marketers tell you as an advertising person what to do and you disagree and, but you can't, what are you going to do? They're in the control seat. So one of my moves was I went back from an advertising role into a marketing role because I wanted to be the director of marketing. I wanted to have the control. And then I got there and I realized I didn't have any control.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of organization you're in.
No, I mean, I had control over my team to a certain extent, but my job, the more senior I went up within the organization, my job was more internally focused. And I realized that senior management was expecting me. So I had to prep for presentations. I had to run that prep by my manager. I had to go back and edit that, and I had to prep it by the manager. I mean, I spent like a month preparing for an internal presentation to senior management. And I found when I was more junior in marketing or on the advertising side, I could spend a lot more time marketing. And no matter what, there's never a place that you have control. Control is all an illusion. You have control over some things, but you don't have control over others. And you have to kind of accept that and work within that framework. So that said, I don't know, Patrick, thoughts on your misperceptions?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, the nail on the head there. The drastic change when you are now in a position where your primary focus is managing up, it is it's a shock to the system to spend most of your time preparing for internal meetings and reporting on the things that you used to be doing. So definitely, you know, very much a point that I agree with, and I think. You know, a couple of the other things that I was pleasantly surprised by when I got into the marketing department is that, you know, you still do, even in our highly regulated environment, you still do have the opportunity to be very creative. You have the opportunity to think outside of the box. And you know, data can be your best friend, even in this highly regulated environment. So I thought, you know, from a perception perspective, I thought that we had to take everything that we said about our product directly from the package insert and call it a day. But I was pleasantly surprised in the fact that even in a highly regulated environment, you still very much have the opportunity to be creative.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think you guys bring up some great points. I think, you know, the best marketers strike that balance of managing up and also managing down at the same time. And it's a hard balance to strike. And, you know, Renee, you also bring up the point about kind of, you know, being in meetings all day long and constantly having to think about kind of that, you know, when do I do the day-to-day work? And I think that's a real challenge sometimes in a marketing role. But Patrick, you bring up the thing that I think is most near and dear to me, which is, you know, often I hear that marketers are just kind of, you know, selling the PI, or that, you know, the compliance and regulatory environment is so restrictive that you really can't be compelling or effective at the end of the day. And I think that's so far from true. And I think the best marketers, they understand, consistent with FDA label guidance, that they understand how to craft a succinct, pithy message that's going to really resonate with customers, and they understand their customer at the end of the day and put them at the center of everything that they're doing, in addition to the patient. So I think, you know, you can be incredibly compelling while still being compliant. So I think that's a really important takeaway.
So Patrick, thinking about our listeners, if they're thinking about making a move, anything that you've learned along the way that you would give them as a hint, tip?
Yeah, you know, I think making a move is an important decision in your career. And I think it's easy to feel like you may have made the wrong move if you don't give it a little time to settle in. You know, one of the things that again, a misperception that I thought was going to happen is, you know, like in sales, there's a 2-week training program when you get hired, and they teach you everything that you need to know in order to do the job successfully. I think in pharmaceuticals, that's very much focused on sales, and the other commercial roles don't necessarily have that training program, or even a roadmap to get started. So I think, you know, be willing to learn. And Renee mentioned it at the beginning of the pod, but saying like that's not in my job description, to me, is one of the things I would want to hear the least from someone I was working with, or was working for me. So, you know, do the right thing. If there's work to be done, it's a learning experience, and taking on more responsibility will help you learn about, you know, these other roles that you may be interested in. But know that you're not going to be an expert at it the day you start, and that no one was. And one day you're going to wake up and realize like, oh, I know what I'm doing a little bit more today. And then that starts to, you know, steamroll until one day you wake up and you're a seasoned marketer or a seasoned sales trainer. But I think it takes patience, and it takes a willingness to, you know, adapt and learn, and not be so regimented in, this is my plan and this is how I'm going to make it happen. Because I think, as we all have seen in our careers, and everyone on earth will probably see in their careers at some point is, as good as your plans are for your career, it's hard to stick to that path in with all the outside influences. So patience and being willing to learn would be my best advice.
Right. So I'm going to actually kind of build on from that. And I think that's such great advice, Patrick. I think, I do think being strategic in the roles that you accept is really important. And I talked about kind of like, good products, good companies. And I think that's so important. But at the same time, being opportunistic, I think, the best leaders that I know have had, roles that ultimately kind of came across their plate. It's kind of the right circumstances presented themselves. And I think that's critically important as well. I also think in terms of advice for others, knowing your brand, what are the 3 things that you want to be remembered for? That's so important. Staying true to those and pulling them through at every chance that you get. I talked about kind of that thread of steel in your career, kind of telling a story, having a narrative, knowing your pinnacle role, and then just being hungry and curious and trying everything that you can. And I guess the last piece of advice I would say is everybody loves to work with somebody who's smart, who's committed, and who's fun. So try to do those 3 things in every role that you have.
I love what you guys just said. And I think that it really comes down to every one of us has fits that are better fits or not so great fits. And knowing yourself and being reflective about yourself and saying, what did I learn from this role and what can I take to my next role and be even better? And understanding a little bit, ask around a lot. Like maybe one side of the business is better for you than others. Maybe one company is better for you than others. Like, do you want to be on a small team? Do you want to work on a large team? Maybe you want to try both. And being very sort of deliberate, but at the same time being opportunistic. I like that word, Cassidy, because it's true. You don't know what's going to come along. So just be open. I looked at it as I didn't have a predestined career path. I looked at it as I wanted to keep growing and learning and building my portfolio of my experiences. And so I evaluated each opportunity that came along and said, well, is this something I want to do? Is this what I do? I think I can do this well. Will I grow from this? And importantly, looking at myself as a kind of a portfolio is, does it add to my opportunities for the future? Because I never wanted to be, I never was like a niche kind of person. I need new things to make me thrive. And so I said, well, if everything builds on each other, so you can go back and forth. I went from the pharmaceutical side to the advertising side, back to the pharmaceutical side, back to the advertising side. So you are not stuck anywhere. Think about like each experience that you have builds on the other. So when I wanted to get back into the advertising side, I would explain how being a brand director was great experience. I understood the client. And so if you think about each experience you've had, it's a building block and it positions you for the next one. And so be open, but be you. Like that's my biggest thing is don't try to be something you think you need to be. Like think about what's going to make you alive, what's going to make you excited. Because everybody, and Cassidy, you said it, you want somebody that's fun to work with. And you want somebody who's passionate about the work that they do. Everybody wants to work with somebody who's passionate about what they do. So think about what's going to ignite your own personal passions and go that way. Don't stay on the path that you think everybody expects you to be on. So I want to thank you, Patrick and Cassidy, for coming to this episode of Thoughts in the Greenhouse. And I hope those of you who are listening today found it to be a little interesting or enlightening as you consider your next move. I mean, we aren't the be all end all, but we're just kind of sharing our personal experiences in hopes that it might help others. So stay tuned, follow and like Thoughts in the Greenhouse for future episodes.